Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you feeling? Happy? Great. Okay, we're done. But yes, so we're here to talk about happiness, and mostly how can you achieve more happiness in your role in work. But I want to start off with a couple of simple questions. First, what percentage of people in the world do you think are unhappy at work? Just raise your hand when you hear it. Do you think it's 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%? Okay, we're not going to 100. Wow, a little bit of pessimism here. That's always very healthy to start things off. Well, we're going to answer that in a little bit. But first, another very big question to start things off. Why do you do anything that you do? Think about that for a moment. Why is it that you do anything, really? And I know that's sort of like this big existential question, right? Our big why. But we can boil it down to something a little bit simpler. And that is really simply, what are some of your goals in life? So go ahead and get one in mind right now. Maybe, for example, you want to get the next promotion in your government entity, or you want financial stability, or maybe you just want to go shopping in Dubai, and if you're going to do that, then you need financial stability. Or maybe you just want to get in shape. So when you have one of those in mind, ask yourself, well, why is that important to me? And then ask yourself again, why is that important to me? And what we see is if you keep asking yourself, well, why is that important? What it comes down to is something very basic. Happiness or prosperity. Well, I want the people around me to be happy, or I want to be happy in my life. So what we see is that happiness is really a common, universal motivator. It cuts through race, religion, ethnicity, country, everything. We're all just following different goals because we want to pursue happiness. And so Aristotle said all the way back in 200 BC, he said, happiness is the purpose of our existence. That's it. It's the be-all, end-all. But maybe more importantly, he also said that happiness is ultimately dependent upon ourselves. So if that's true, the science actually backs it up. It says our brains are hardwired to seek happiness. We go through life thinking, oh, I'll be happy when I get that donut. But it also tells us that we're really super bad at predicting what will give us long-term sustainable happiness. Short-term, no problem. The first donut is really good, the first piece of cake. The second one, not as good. So we keep pursuing that, and we end up not really having sustainable happiness. And I want to bring some real-life examples into play here. So first off, we have Zara on the right. She just got her financial statement from her government pension. Now she's thinking, I thought if I worked in government my whole life, I would be happy. But maybe her pension isn't quite what she wanted it to be. Or Sarah in the middle. She thought becoming a lawyer would make her happy, long run. But clearly this phone call is proving her wrong. Or Muhammad on the end. I think he's just upset because he didn't get a lot of Facebook likes. So, and we have different generations here, right? We have millennials, we have the Gen X, we have baby boomers. It doesn't matter where we're from. All of us are pursuing something like this formula. I'll be happy when I get that promotion. I'll be happy when I get into the best hair and makeup in Dubai. I'll be happy when I get the new home, the new car. But that formula doesn't have sustainable results. As soon as we connect to one of those goals, our mind chases the goalpost, and pretty soon we're chasing after the next item. Otherwise, anybody who ever got a new home would be happy for the rest of their life. So how do we approach this? And also, what about at work? Happiness is an emotion. Typically, we think of emotions as being belonging at work. Normally, we've tried to separate them out from work. But emotion is an energy in motion, so it moves and flows through all parts of our day and our life. Just think about how a bad emotion follows you around. You wake up in the morning, maybe there's no coffee, maybe it's raining in Dubai, you have an awful day, you go into work, you take that to work with you, and then you have a bad day at work, you take it home to your family, to your relationships. And over time, what that does is it starts to affect our resilience, our psychological capital, our ability to deal with struggles in life. And then that affects how we show up to work in the end. So we spend 1/3 of our lives at work. That's as much time as we spend sleeping. Can we really be happy in life if we're not happy at work? And the latest research says, no, not really. The single strongest determinant of our overall happiness is actually if we find happiness in the workplace. So that's huge news. It used to be hobbies and family and the things that we love and we're passionate about. The shift is to saying, well, work is life. And so if we find happiness there, then we can more easily find happiness in our lives. So what it really boils down to is this very simple formula that we've been using for the past 15 plus years. And that is that happy employees leads to happier citizens, happier people, and that leads to a more successful country or government or UAE, but also more meaningful lives. And we'll talk more about what kind of happiness we're talking about in a bit. So what I'm going to share with you in the next 30 minutes is basically what we've learned and what I've learned about happiness and how you can work it more into your daily lives at work. And so everybody in this room has their own experience of happiness. It's as different as every one of us are, so it also begins with every one of our personal stories. So for me, my happiness at work story begins with college. I went to a great 4-year university. My dad paid for it, thank you. My mom kind of tricked him into it. But anyways, I had friends, I had teachers who really appreciated me and encouraged me. I was running on the sports clubs and developing new clubs. Things were looking really good, and I was excited to get out of work and to have my first job because people told me, well, that's when you'll really have freedom. That's when you'll really experience happiness, is wait until you get into the real world and you start working. And so I was excited, and I went out of my college graduation, and I got my first job in urban planning, a city office in New York City. And I rode the subway down to 34th Street in Manhattan. Does anyone here know New York? Yes, okay, so there I was, and then I rode the elevator up the Empire State Building. Really good beginning, right? And I got into my first workplace, and they showed me to my cubicle, and I sat there, and I waited for someone to talk to me or for some energy. Instead, I got assignments. I never saw anything that came from the assignments, and I started to look around, and I sort of realized that people were they had sort of shut down from work. There was no expression, there was no life there. They were sort of pushing by expressionless faces. In fact, the only time that they seemed excited was when they were talking about the weekends. So I realized that people were at work in order to escape work. We had created a life that we really relished mostly getting away from in that workplace. And so I stuck around for 2 weeks, and then I left. And it scared me so much that I decided I was going as far as I possibly could, all the way across the country to San Francisco. And I also thought, well, I want to work in some place that's going to be fun. So naturally, I became a bartender because I thought this is going to make me really happy. And I pursued that for a while, and I actually became a sake sommelier. So I was teaching people all about this, but I found it empty, and I was hungover. So I started to pursue other things. I started to write articles and write food reviews in magazines and do advertising. And then I became a researcher for the World Health Organization on health and well-being. And all of these opportunities kept giving me little boosts of happiness. And then I worked at a startup and another startup and another startup. But as I went through all of this job hopping, looking for some place that I would feel more complete, I realized that actually what I was feeling was an emptiness growing inside of me. None of these gave me sustainable happiness, but I didn't know why. So I decided to start looking for it or running away from it in a different way. since running away from jobs wasn't working, I literally started running, which was a passion of mine. So I started running marathons, and then I ran a 50-miler. And then I was training for a 100-mile trail race up and over the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. I was training about 60 miles a week. And I was finding that a little bit better than facing this emptiness of not feeling like I could find any work that was fulfilling. So that worked for a little while until I got injured. And I had to stop cold turkey because I blew out my knee. So right when that happened, also the first dot-com bust happened. So the job market fell out. I lost my job, I was sitting on the couch, and what happens when we slow down is that normally we see all of the holes that are in our lives. So I started to see that I had a lot of holes, and that emptiness really hit me at the time, and I thought, am I failing at this happiness thing? Or do you just accept that work, that's what work is? You go in, you work, you get a paycheck, and then you look for happiness outside of work. And right around then, a young CEO gave me a book called Delivering Happiness. And it was about a different approach to happiness. It was about, instead of pursuing it through work or titles or status or job, it was about passion and purpose. And so he asked me to join, and he said it was going to be consulting. And I said, no, thank you. I already had a job in an office, and I didn't think I wanted to repeat that. But I went home and I thought about it, and as so often happens, I realized that what I was running away from was exactly what I was the best equipped to help. So we started building this company called Delivering Happiness, studying positive psychology, looking at everything that had been done with Zappos. And that was the beginning of a new life for me. And people ask me usually, well, are you happy now? And I can honestly say the highs and lows, they're still there, but they're more sustainable. So when the lows come, you know that the highs are going to be right there, and you know how to walk through them, and you're not running from them. So you might be noticing why I laid the slide out this way through my life's ups and downs. And it's really looking at the highs and lows in life. And one of the hardest times was in the middle, when I had flatlined. That's when apathy sets in. That's when we step away from what we're doing. That's when we shut down or become disengaged at work. Or in the worst case scenario, we become disengaged in our lives. And then the lows are just a part of life. But the reason that I show you this is because this is one of the main exercises that we actually do with most leaders when we start working with them. What is your happiness story? What are the highs and the lows? What values or meaning was significantly there for you in the highs, or what was painfully absent during the lows? And this is how we can start to get a sense of what our happiness story is and where we arrive at some of the principles. But I want to share another story with you. How many of you have heard of Zappos? 2 people? Yeah, they don't deliver here. How many of you have been to Las Vegas? All right, a few more. They say that Vegas and Dubai are very similar. It's like they call Dubai the Vegas of the Middle East sometimes. So this is Las Vegas, and this is Zappos, shoe company, and their headquarters there. Now, there's not a rainbow over Zappos every day, but when they started building this little company, they did realize something magical. Basically, they realized that people will forget what you said, and they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. They were realizing the importance of the emotional experience in running a business. And they said, well, we want people to feel great, and we want our customers to feel great. So how about we just become the best customer service company out there? And they started to think about, well, how do we apply this to business decisions? So this is their warehouse in Kentucky, or some people might say it's kind of like a woman's dream closet. There's a lot of shoes in there, all on these cool conveyor belts and everything. But I show this picture because they were applying these decisions around emotions to things like taking their shipping in-house off of an outsourced model, which was hugely expensive and filled with bumps. But they did it because they wanted to be in control of that emotional experience so that they could upgrade shipping overnight. So think about ordering a pair of shoes and then they just arrive the next day on your doorstep. Only they could really do that instead of their outshipper. So those things, free upgrades overnight, they started to make a difference. They did make customers happy, but they needed a way to sustain it. And what they realized is that their customers were happy when they were making connections on the phones, but not just any connection. So a concept developed called PECs, personal emotional connections. And this is about going beyond just the regular everyday and trying to find a level that you can connect with people on a human level that's more meaningful. And they work this into all of their phone calls now because it's about going beyond satisfaction to thinking about, well, what are the unrecognized needs of the person on the other end of the phone, and how can we meet those? And then what ends up happening is it turns into a story. So a lot of people have these dramatic stories about Zappos service. Does anybody want to take a guess what the longest phone call on record is at Zappos? What do you think? An hour? 2 hours? Somebody said 6 hours. It's 11 hours on one phone call because they wanted to have PECs, or personal emotional connection, and it resulted in the sale of a pair of shoes for $49.95. But it created a story. It was parodied on Jimmy Fallon's late night show, and that started to create more of a buzz than the $49.95 shoes ever could. So the question became, how do we sustain happiness for our customers? If we're going to make our customers happy, well, that means that internally, the employees have to be happy. Because if we don't sustain that, then it's not going to last. So internally, culture became the number one priority at Zappos very early on. And so that means that they started to do some innovative things. Mostly, it means hire, measure, and fire by culture. For example, there's 2 interviews, a skills and a culture interview. Guess which one holds more weight? The culture interview, yes. There's 5 weeks of paid training when you come on. You're not just given an employee handbook, but you are taken through what all the values mean, the history of the company. And then at the end of 5 weeks, they make what's known as the offer. Has anybody heard of this? It's $4,000 to quit. Now, I know in Dubai that's not a lot of money, but in Las Vegas, it actually is. And so they started at $100, they made it $1,000, and now it's at $4,000, and they're saying it's still not enough because they want people to go home and just think about, well, hey, do I value the money, or do I really want to be a part of this company instead? So they come back more committed to the culture and to be there and to be a part of the journey. Something else they do, a culture book. Every year, they ask every employee, what do you think of working here? What do you think about our culture? And then they print it, unedited except for typos, and then they give it away for free to anyone in the world. And I'll tell you how to get one of these copies later on. So it became a litmus test, an early way to measure culture, and it provided extreme transparency so they could see what was really going on in the culture. But they knew that they needed a way to embed this into the DNA of the organization. And so this idea came up, core values. Like something like this, right? Have you ever seen something like that? Integrity, excellence, respect, the words on a wall, they sound really good. And they said, well, what do those really do if they're just words on a wall? So they decided, hey, you know what? We're going to create what we call committable core values. So they came up with 10 core values that instead of being, here's how we want you to operate, that fly is but not in my values system right now. I'll go over here. Oh, really? Oh, come back. They said, what about we take those values of the people and we make the values not just for the organization, but so that they help people be their best selves as well. And then they started to hire, measure, and fire on them. So for example, number 3, create fun and a little weirdness. Well, they actually ask in their interviews, hey, on a scale from 1 to 10, how weird are you? So what would you say? 1? A 10? So maybe if you're a 10, it's like too weird. No, but it's not about the number, right? It's about people going home and thinking about, well, am I going to fit in a place where weirdness is valued? So We do know the case story on this. Zappos went to a multi-billion-dollar company right through the recession based on happiness and focusing on the culture. We also know that organizations around the world are doing this, and now governments too. We're starting to work with governments in the United States. Of course, you guys are pioneering this in Dubai, so it's really special to be here talking about it with you. But the best organizations outperform 3 times, 4 times in any situation when they're focusing on their employees. Yet, who's this? Office Space, yeah. I love it. It's an old movie, but it's still relevant. We remember him. This is the face of unhappiness at work. So last chance, what percentage of people in the world do you think are unhappy at work? 60? That's a pretty good guess. Okay, it's 85% globally that are coming into work. They're checked out. Punching in, punching out, getting done as little as possible. And then a small percentage of that, about 13 or 14%, are actively sabotaging projects and the people around them because they're so unhappy at work. How did we get here, that the state of the work is like this? And of course, it's costing us a tremendous amount. It's $7 trillion, they estimate, in the United States. So what we've seen is that the speed of change has been exponential lately. We've got, the internet of everything. We've got the speed of information faster than we've ever known before, so fast we can barely keep up. Globalization and constant change. All kinds of industries are changing constantly. And yet, as humans, we're trying to adapt to that, and there's a huge delta in how we're able to adapt to all of those changes happening around us. That's why security and stability have become important values again. It's too much, we're overwhelmed, and we're seeing the effects of it. We have the younger generations are the most stressed out yet, they are the most burned out, they have the least amount of friends, and a study just came out showing that the number 5 cause of death in the United States is stress from overwork. And in other countries, that's a big concern, for example, in Japan. So on a human level, we're not quite keeping up. And what about organizations? What is this? It's an org chart. When is this org chart from? Last year? When? 100 years? That's pretty good, yeah. This is an organizational chart from the railroads in the United States in the 1950s. But it looks pretty familiar. Work hasn't adapted that fast either. We are still way behind the times in what we can be doing with all of this change, smart Dubai, everything happening around us. So as Darwin says, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, it's those most adaptable to change. We really think of, we've been through all of these eras, the agrarian era, the industrial era, and now you can say we're in the technology era. What we really think about is that we're actually in something like the adaptive era. There's so much changing around us. We have to ground into what we can control and who we are, and change what we can and embrace what we can't. So the invitation for you is really, the one-offs and the two-offs and the culture hacks, they're great, they get us moving. I know you have bigger aspirations in Dubai and that it's happening. So it's really to zoom out and to reframe. We're at a precipice here. The golden era of work can be right here, where the opportunity is to recreate those systems that aren't working into something more human that helps us thrive as humans and as a society. So how do we zoom out and reframe the way we work? Okay, what does the science have to say? If we really want to do this, we have to pay attention to the science. So this is a chart. This is the way that researchers and psychologists have studied people for a long time. And see all of those dots? Those are all humans. Those are people on the chart. And so researchers study that, and they say, well, wow, look, we're all doing pretty good. We've got this nice line, except for that one little weird dot out there. Do you see that weirdo, that weird person in the room? We know who that is, right? It's all of us at some point. Well, what researchers say is, we got to erase that dot. It's messing up our data. So we want to have a nice average line. And for a long time, psychology was this. It was, how do we get to the average? But if we study the average, then we're going to continue to be simply average. Until 1998, this guy came along. His name's Marty Seligman. And he said, well, hold on a second. That one that dot out there, that's a high-performing outlier. What we should be doing is moving the whole line up to that dot. And that is where positive psychology was born. How do we take individuals and teams and help them thrive? And since then, there's been about 20 years of research that we're just starting to apply now in businesses and in organizations. So back to this first question. Most of us are following a formula something like this. Money, title, status, success will lead us to happiness. And when we look at the science, what it says is, yes, that's true. They do help us. They do give us some happiness, but only to a certain point. And when you reach that certain financial level, your happiness flatlines. And it's not very high. It's right around the poverty level. What the research shows us is actually the formula is stronger the other way around. When we raise our levels of happiness first, then every positive indicator of our own personal success and business success goes up with it. So a lot of us have had the formula the wrong way around for a long time. And I don't want you to take my word for this, and I know a lot of us here in this room already believe this, but what about the experts? People at the end of their lives, what do they say about happiness? So this is from a study by Bonnie Ware, a palliative care nurse, and she noticed the top 5 regrets of the dying. And I'm not going to mention all of them right now, but the number one regret of the dying is that I wish I'd had the courage to live a life that was true to myself, not the life that others wanted for me. They got to the end of their lives, and it was then that they realized that a lot of the accomplishments and the dreams that had come true for them were not their own. They were the dreams of other people. And they had to look back, realizing that it had been a choice that they didn't allow themselves to be happier or to be more true to themselves. So, and I know this is a complicated, scenario, and it's not to get down on us, but it is to say that we have the opportunity to change the I wishes to I lived. And also, we know that happiness is predetermined to a certain extent, right? Right? Or is it all up to you? Some of you are smiling. So happiness is predetermined, it's true, but the most recent research says only 10%. It's where you're born, it's what color your hair is, it's who your parents are and things that you have no control over. The other 90% of happiness is within our control. 40% of that readily in whatever we say or do in the moment, and then about another 50% when we work a little harder at it, at rewiring some of our habits and our brains. So here's one of the ways that it works. Our brains are these amazing things. We process about 40 bits of information per second. And that seems pretty good. It's coming in through all 5 of our senses. But the reality is that we receive 11 million bits of information per second. So not even the most amazing government multitasker can process all of that information. So what it becomes about is what we focus on. So now we all know people that can walk into a room, it can be like Mother Teresa's room, and they'll be like, oh gosh, those drapes are horrible. Doesn't she get anybody to clean this place? Negative people all the time, so we call that pessimism. We also know people who focus on positive all the time. Everything's great. Everything's going to be perfect. Oh yeah, that's not a problem. I've decided that the technical term for that is annoying. And most of us have met some of those people. And there's another option though. We can see the positive and we can see the negative. We choose what we want to respond to. We choose those 40 bits of information that will help us without ignoring the negative around us. So, and this comes from a theory called broaden and build, which is a foundational theory in positive psychology. And what it turns out is that we do our best work when we're up. We're more collaborative, we're more innovative, we welcome people to work on projects with us, our brain sees more opportunities around us, and we become more successful this way. So this quote just about sums it up. The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects the wind to change. The realist adjusts the sails. So we have to adjust our sails if we want to be happier in life. And so also, not all happiness is created equal. So I'm going to break that news to you right now. So you have the timeline going up on the side and how long that happiness lasts on the bottom there. And the shortest, most lasting type of happiness, pleasure. A pair of new shoes, a beautiful dinner out, anything that gives us pleasure in life that can be fleeting. Usually this is attributed to things that we can buy or purchase or possessions. But, it's really hard to maintain those unless you're a rock star, like Daenerys Starborn. Anybody watching Game of Thrones? Yes. Thank you. It's just about on again, right? I think she's a rock star. Okay, the second type of happiness, second longest lasting, is passion. So when we're involved in a passion project or when you bring passion to work, it's known as flow. This is a concept developed by a guy named Mikai Csikszentmihalyi, and I'm just glad he didn't name it after himself. Thanks. And the last one is higher purpose, being a part of something that's bigger than ourselves. So the thing is that we're not really taught that in school, but also, how are we pursuing happiness? If we look at this chart, it makes sense to put the most of our time into higher purpose, and then passion, and then pleasures. Although it's more difficult to do that, so a lot of us end up on a different path. And it's not just about work, right? 1/3 of our lives is spent at work, so what we do in our lives transitions to work. But we saw early on that there's a lot of similarities between the most successful organizations and the science of happiness. So the most successful ones layer on the passion and purpose on top of the profits as well. So here's some of the stats. I think you know these, but they're there. I'll let you know how you can get this deck if you want to sell this up or convince anyone of some of these. But we see between the happiest and least happy organizations, things like 300% higher innovation. We see retention, burnout go way down, which is a huge cause of concern today too. So ultimately, emotions are contagious. We are constantly affecting the people around us. So we're going to do a quick little exercise. Are you ready? Yeah? Are you awake? Yes? Okay. So you're going to turn to the person next to you. You're going to decide who's person A and who's person B. Person A, you have glasses. Person B, you don't. Or person A, maybe you, are taller. So person A, you're going to look at person B and wait for them. Person B, your job is to look at person A and smile. Are you ready? Okay, decide who's person A and person B. Person A, your job is to look at them. You're waiting for them. Person B, your job is to look at them and smile. Okay, very good. Bring your attention back up here. Very good. So what happened? Everybody smiled back. Did anybody not smile? No, okay. You tried. It's hard, right? So we have these things in us called mirror neurons, and they light up to respond to what's happening in the world. They look like that funky drawing there. So emotions predate language as communication. Emotions around us, we pick up on them. So really, we're always either affecting others or we're infecting them with the emotions that we bring around. Do you ever realize that some people bring happiness wherever they go and other people bring happiness whenever they go? We probably know people like that. So the question is, what is your emotional wake? How can we be more aware of our intention and the impact that we're having as we walk through a room with our emotional wake? So that's just one little principle for us to experience. How do we apply this? So what we set out to do is to first capture the learnings from Zappos. So it came out in a book called Delivering Happiness, and who knew what to think about a business book about happiness, but it became 5 minutes? Okay, it became a bestseller, and we went around the world, and we talked to people about happiness, and we have 5 minutes left. So We've been working with all kinds of organizations, from Tom's Shoes to most recently government organizations in finance, and thank God we've been working with the Franchise Tax Board and people who do our taxes. I really was excited to talk to them because taxes don't make me happy. And of course, Prime Minister's Office, Dubai. So we were here a couple years ago, part of the beginning of the ideas of pioneering this program, and it's top secret what we did, but the results are speaking for themselves today. So here's the elements of happiness at work. On the bottom is values and behaviors. Layer in on top of that the science of happiness, the things that drive all of us towards happiness in our lives, and on the top is higher purpose, and that is the most strong, long-lasting type of happiness that we know. I'm going to give you some examples of these and then a few tools. And like I said, we'll go a little fast, but I'll give you this deck in the end. Defining values should be values of the people. Things that resonate, that help us be better, and we don't want to stop there. How do you know how to live respect? How do you even know what respect means to everybody in the room? We need to also define what are the behaviors to live those values by. For example, be humble. How do you think humble is? Well, one of the behaviors for them at Zappos is demonstrates that good ideas can come from anyone. So it's about values and behaviors, and also aligning to those. What opportunity do you have to think about your personal values and how they relate to the values that you're living in your government entity? Number 2, sense of progress. We all need to feel that we're moving forward in life. Also, there were some results from your survey last year. Career and progression is clear. Opportunities to learn and develop are clear. So we want people to feel and sense the progress. So this is one example of how Zappos did it early on. They came into a new position 18 months before you get a promotion. Well, that's a long time. So what they did is they simply broke it up into 3 smaller promotions at 6 months. No pay raise until the end, but what people felt is that they were moving through faster. They were making a sense of progress in their lives. Next, sense of control, autonomy, freedom to make decisions, to do things in our own way. This one's hugely related to customer service as well, and we need it because if we don't feel that we own our tasks, that we have some control over how to do them, we can disengage very quickly. We have to, because they're not ours, they're somebody else's idea. One way of encouraging this is transparency. Allowing the whys to be heard. This is the CEO of LinkedIn. And they're a really transparent organization. What he does is he has bi-weekly all-employee meetings. He has an hour for the meeting and then 2 hours afterwards where people can come and talk to him personally. And he lets them ask questions about the company, whatever is most important to them. For example, when Microsoft bought LinkedIn, he wrote a letter to all of the employees saying why this was happening and what it would mean to everyone's job, and then sent the letter public. And so we have companies doing radical transparency now too, making salaries even public. Last, sense of connectedness. This is a huge epidemic right now that we're not connected to the people around us. We have breadth of connection with social media, and we're doing really good at that, but we are not doing good at depth of connection. That is where we're the most lonely generation yet. This is one way that one company did it. Close down all the doors except for the front one. So everybody has to have an opportunity to have a serendipitous collision and just recognize each other and say hello. And the companies, they're doing so many things around this. Pancake breakfasts, where leaders come in and they make pancakes for the rest of their staff, and then it catches on and the staff makes pancakes. But what are the ways that you have an opportunity to connect through your passions in a meaningful way with those at work? Because when we discover similarities, that is the foundation of trust, and we become 7 times more engaged in our job when we have good friends at work. And finally, higher purpose. What is the higher purpose that you are all here for? So as government workers, we come feeling that we want to do right, we want to help the citizens, we want to help the country, we want the smartest, happiest Dubai. The question then is, how do we connect to it personally, and how do we help those around us connect to it? For example, charity water. They get water to people in developing nations. But you cannot miss it, because anywhere you go in the office are pictures of what they're doing for those nations and for those children. So it's very easy to connect to that. And so this happens on 3 levels. personal level, the team level, and the community level. But it really starts with us. Because if we are not familiar with our own happiness, it's really hard for us to spread that and share that with everybody else. So what's next? A couple of tips and tools for you as we wrap up. Really, if we're going to realize this, it seems that the time has already come. That it's happening in Dubai, that it's starting to happen in other government organizations around the world. So here's one quick example of a healthcare organization. A lot of similarities because people are there because they want to help people heal. They come in with a purpose like government organizations, and yet there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape, constant change, and so the doctors and the nurses and the staff were really not happy in this organization. It's called Northwell Health. There's about 55,000 people. Conglomerate across the United States. So we came in and we said, okay, well, let's roll out a different culture here. So they rolled out a culture of care that stood for connectedness, awareness, empathy, and respect. And it was about helping each other care for each other. So not necessarily about the patients first. The first way that we can care for our patients or for our citizens is to care about each other. And they rolled it out across 55,000 employees, and in the end, their engagement went from 45% to 85% engagement. So they started bringing this home and saying that their family lives were changing. So here's a couple steps and tools for you. Number one is define your values. Think about your own. What is your happiness heartbeat? What are some of the highs and lows that have brought you happiness or when it's been really absent in your life? How do those align to the values in your government organization, whether they're the espoused values or they're the assumed ones? Because the more you can live your values there, the happier that you can be at work. Number two, think about what fires you up. What do you wake up for every day? What might your purpose be? What brings you passion? And then how can you bring that into the workplace and funnel it through your work? And number three, I know you're measuring citizens and you have measurement all over the government entities of happiness. How about your own? What does your happiness landscape look like? So I'm going to give you a way to take the Delivering Happiness Index, which we've been developing, to get your individual happiness landscape based on this model and see where you are doing well or not. So for any of these, if you want a copy of this presentation or the Delivering Happiness Index or a copy of the culture book, just email me, sunny@deliveringhappiness.com. And I'll be walking around too if you want a card or something for that. But finally, we can keep doing the same thing and we're going to get the same results. It's really about those little 1-2 degree changes that we can make that can start to send us off in a completely new direction. And really, it starts with us. So in the middle is each of us. And now that means there's great freedom and great responsibility for our own happiness. 90% within our control. But when we take control of that, we can ripple it out to our teams, our families, the organization, the world, the citizens of Dubai, and beyond. So the ROI, or the ripples of impact opportunity, is huge for us. And this quote really sums it up. It's by Rumi, the Persian poet. He said, "Yesterday I was smart, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself." So what is the one little thing that you will do to change your world and take control of your happiness? So here's my email again, and thank you very much for having us here today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.